I have started to write my thoughts on the George Floyd murder and the protests, including the decision by President Trump to deploy active military troops against American citizens exercising their constitutional, lawful right to peaceful protest, at least a half a dozen times. But for the first time in my life, I could not find the right words, perhaps because I could not begin to fathom the horror that George Floyd experienced. Knowing that he was dying, knowing he did not need to die, knowing that the very people who had a sworn oath, a sworn duty to protect and serve, were abusing that power in an act of blatant murder. The video of his cries, begging, pleading for his life is haunting. They took his breath away. The brutality of his death took away mine. No words can convey that. I did, however, find meaning in the silence of the lack of societal response to a growing, re-emerging systemic racism in America, which has been emboldened by the lack of consequence for escalating numbers of unthinkable brutality by law enforcement against the Black community, as well as divisive verbiage from those who have a duty to use words and actions to unite and not to inflame. Don't get me wrong, I have the utmost respect for those in law enforcement who are professionals, who put their lives on the line every day fighting against true criminals. But it is time to clean house, not only to rid the police departments of prejudicial officers who commit acts of cruelty and unnecessary force, but also, in so doing, to support those officers who would never engage in such acts, who do live up to their sworn duty each and every day. But it would be naive to imagine that the problem of racial inequality in America is only found in addressing law enforcement issues. It's everywhere in our culture, as any person of color can tell you, though their voices have not been heard by the people who needed to listen, until perhaps now. The wellspring of protests is a result of the last straw that broke the proverbial camel's back. It's always been bad. But no one who bore witness to the murder of George Floyd can continue to be naive about it, can continue to ignore it. The root of the blatant acts of racism is fear, always has been. I've never understood it. Those who were racist, not even as a child. Why should the amount of pigmentation in a person's skin be the cause of such hatred, indoctrinated generation after generation? Why the need to have a them and us attitude? Why is different a threat to anyone? How can people who go to church on Sunday be okay with going to a KKK meeting on Monday? And more importantly, what is it going to take to not just cut the stalk of racism at the ground level, basically in mere appearance and hollow words and meaningless actions, but to dig deep and yank the very roots of racism from the American soil? The answer may just have begun with George Floyd, in the voices of people from all colors joining together to say, enough! The precious freedoms found in the First Amendment, notably 3 of the 5 freedoms, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, and the right to assembly, are the very backbone of this country. To witness tens of thousands of people exercising their freedoms should be a wake-up call to those who would seek to limit those rights, and who have heretofore cast a blind eye to racism, because racism and prejudice never affected them personally, or perhaps because they enjoyed the power that came with the position of superiority. The first possibility is mere ignorance. The second is the most perverted form of arrogance, and this nation can no longer afford either one. This country has always prided itself on overcoming the odds rooted in its very humble beginnings. We have experienced polarity as a nation before. We perched on the brink of literal destruction, torn apart by 2 totally opposite ideologies during the Civil War, which now, seen from an historical perspective, seems inconceivable. The choice and defense to own people, horrifying. though at the time it was utterly normal to buy and sell people for half of our country, defended vigorously with the blood of 250,000 Confederate soldiers for the cause. Today, we find ourselves again on a precipice of societal division that threatens the very fabric of our nation, as we again face a very real threat of constitutional liberties. I have to believe that the greater good, the return to values of love and respect for all people, the voice of reason, fairness, and justice will again rise up, or perhaps more accurately, a literal rebirth of our nation will occur, with the seed of equality that was planted hundreds of years ago will finally be fully nourished, will flourish, and will be available to all. It is surely starting, reflected in the choruses of peaceful protest, of the refusal by so many to continue to go along with the status quo, of the rejection of rhetoric designed to promulgate anger and hate hidden behind messages of strength and decisiveness. I have to believe that at our core we are better than this. Our very survival depends on that belief. Praying for the soul of our nation and sending the most respectful prayers to the family and friends of George Floyd, Nan.